What does a perfect family even look like? It's a question every culture tries to answer, and each one has its own blueprint. Today, we're going to dive into one very specific blueprint. It comes from the text Minchanto Rumah Tangga Rasulullah, and it lays out a faith-based guide for building a harmonious home, all centered on the life of the Prophet Muhammad. So that's the big question, right? What is the blueprint for an ideal family? Well, the text we're exploring today doesn't mess around. It gives a very specific answer, and it's one that's deeply rooted in Islamic tradition. And it all revolves around the life of one central figure, the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, but before we get into all the how-tos, the nitty-gritty details, the source text is really clear that we have to understand the why. Why is this particular model considered the ultimate guide? And the answer, well, it all boils down to one single foundational principle. And here it is, the whole framework. Everything we're about to talk about, it rests on this core belief that the Prophet Muhammad is the definitive role model. And not just for some things, but for all aspects of life. We're talking from public leadership all the way down to the most private, intimate parts of life, like family and marriage. Now, this isn't just some casual suggestion, It's actually rooted right in the testimony of faith, the Shahadat. And the source really breaks this down for us. It explains that this declaration, it isn't just a sentence you say. It's an active, living commitment to see the Prophet as your number one guide for how to live, day in and day out. And from that single commitment, 4 direct consequences just spill out. It's not a passive belief, it's a super active framework for your life. First, you believe what he conveyed. Second, you obey what he commanded. Third, you stay away from what he forbade. And fourth, you only worship in the way he showed. This whole logic, it's really the engine that drives everything else we're going to discuss. So, to really ground this idea, the source points us directly to Scripture. There's a verse in the Quran that explicitly calls the Prophet a good example for believers to follow. And honestly, this verse is pretty much the cornerstone for the entire argument, the whole reason for following his blueprint for life. Then the source draws this really sharp contrast. It's like it's setting up 2 paths. On one hand, you have the good example of the Prophet, which, that's the path to God's grace. And on the other hand, you have the bad example, which the text defines as just blindly following the traditions of your ancestors, especially if they've strayed from that path. And just to really drive this point home, to hammer in this principle of obedience, another key verse gets highlighted. The command here is so direct, so clear. What the Rasul gives you, take it. And what he forbids you, leave it. That really solidifies the whole idea that his teachings are meant to be the definitive guide. All right, so with that whole foundation laid out, how does this blueprint actually work in the home? Let's get practical. We're going to start with the principles outlined for the husband, who the text describes as the family's leader and guide. So the text really sets up the husband's role as the starting point for the whole family structure. But, and this is a big but, as we're about to see, this isn't just about authority or being in charge. This leadership role comes with a really specific set of duties and a very particular way of behaving. So you might be asking, okay, why this leadership role specifically for the husband? The source gives a few key reasons. It talks about things like perceived physical and mental strengths, greater patience, and historical precedent, like how prophets and leaders were chosen. And of course, there's the huge responsibility of providing for the family, something known as nafaka. And look, this is an absolutely crucial point in the text. This idea of leadership, it's not about domination. It's about compassion. The Prophet himself is held up as the model here, through his gentleness, his playfulness, and even helping out with household chores. So in this blueprint, leadership is actually rooted in a very active partnership. To really explain this need for patience and understanding, the source shares this really powerful analogy. It compares a woman to a bent rib. The idea is, if you try to force it straight, it'll just break. So the lesson here isn't about trying to fix or correct her, but about appreciating her nature just as it is. All right, now let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this partnership. The source shifts its focus to the wife's complementary role, and she's described as the guardian of the home and really a pillar of the family's spiritual life. The text actually uses a specific term for this, qanitat, to describe pious women, and it's defined as a woman who is obedient to Allah and to her husband. So you see, her entire role is framed within this religious context with a kind of dual obedience. So what does this role as guardian actually mean in practice? Well, it translates into a few key responsibilities. It's all about maintaining the integrity of the household. We're talking about guarding her honor and her husband's property when he's not around, not letting people into the home without his say-so, and really protecting the sanctity of that space. And there's a quote cited from the prophet that kind of sums all this up from the husband's point of view. It describes the best woman as someone who pleases him when he looks at her, who obeys him when he commands, and who does not go against his wishes, all in the name of preserving that harmony in the relationship. And again, this really reinforces that idea of an active, supportive partnership. Her role is anything but passive. It includes things like motivating her husband toward good deeds and worship, adorning herself for him, and guarding her tongue to avoid seeking divorce over, trivial stuff. It's about protecting the marriage. Okay, so we've looked at the husband's role as the leader and the wife's role as the guardian. Now let's kind of zoom out a bit and see how these two pieces are meant to fit together to create one harmonious whole. The real key takeaway here, the big idea, is complementarity. The text isn't presenting this as a power hierarchy. It's much more like two interlocking puzzle pieces. Each person has their own distinct responsibilities, and they're designed to work together to create balance and a shared spiritual focus for the family. And you can really see that partnership laid out clearly here. On the one side, you have the husband's role, which is all about guidance and providing sustenance. And on the other, you have the wife's role, focused on guarding the home and motivating everyone toward good deeds. The idea, according to the source, is that they function like a single, cohesive unit. And all of this brings us to the ultimate goal, the whole point of this blueprint. It's not just about following a list of rules. The stated goal is to build a family life that's filled with what the source calls tranquility, love, and mercy. It's about creating a home where every single member of the family can truly thrive, both spiritually and emotionally. So there you have it. That's the blueprint for family life as it's laid out in the source material we've been exploring. And it kind of leaves us with a final, much bigger question to chew on. How do these kinds of detailed, historical, faith-based blueprints continue to shape and inform not just individual relationships, but entire societal structures in our world today? Definitely something to think about.